Hey, everybody, welcome to week 108. And yes, we are keeping track. It's like now we have to keep score. So, oh my goodness, we've got plenty of stuff going on, but we're going to go do a deep dive on succession planning as we promised last week. So anybody jumping on here, you know what to do. Hit us with Q&A. You can interrupt us as we're going. We want this to be interactive, not just, one-way street. Also, you can harass us on the chat. I will launch a poll at the very beginning of this, but I know that Congress is supposedly back in the swamp, and who knows what they're doing. They think they know what's best for business, and I'm convinced that they don't because most of them have never run a business. So anyway, but that's not what we're going to talk about too much. But I think, Jack, if I'm not mistaken, don't you have an update that you want to give us on that?
Yeah, so a couple things. Interesting. I get the Wall Street Journal delivered to my driveway in the mornings, and then earlier at the end of last week, so Friday, ended up with a Charlotte Observer instead of the Wall Street Journal. It's a paper courier, so sends the same. But after our discussion last week about attrition and people quitting and stuff, this shows up. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah. We quit.
And the article was about, the leverage that employees have over employers and basically making demands. And it's just, and obviously it's industry dependent, but, being able to say, well, this is, what I need, this, et cetera. I've also heard of prospect employees when they're job searching, the job search starts remote work, Charlotte, North Carolina, and then industry kind of thing. So it's become more of a focus and more of a priority in remote work, and then understanding kind of the parameters of what is no longer a typical workplace environment of having hybrids of people working from home or otherwise, which goes back to, do you have the ability and the desire to offer that to others, and the consequences of doing that and not having people in the office, whether it's a mentor-mentee relationship, whether it is just, camaraderie, where, whatever it may be, peer relationships, for me to be able to walk down the hall and talk to, people on this call have met Stephanie Daniels, our wealth strategist, estate planner, or Warren Keene, our tax person. So, it's all those things that I think we miss out on. So that's my personal perspective on it, but also understanding that if we want to get some good people, that we may have to and have relented in putting together this hybrid situation. So secondly, haven't heard a whole lot out of Capitol Hill. They came back earlier this week from their Easter recess. I was hoping, and in my post for today, put in, did they come back inspired, or is it kind of more of the same, that we'll just kind of trudge through it and then deal with our distractions of this small little conflict over on the other side of the world and those kind of things. So, and then just a kind of random comment is that it's interesting to see how the war does impact our economy, the world economy, but our national economy. And, the threat of us getting more involved than we already have been, but rather than the kind of the rhetoric, but actually sending money and arms and other things directly into kind of the hot box of things. So, and I think that will have a ripple effect on businesses and all the other things that we've experienced with supply chain and everything else, because the world is very reactive, one thing on the other. So, well, that's a long-winded way of saying that there's a lot of unknown in the market, and to the extent that we can bring some clarity at this point, we're certainly happy to do that. So, to Gary's question at the front end, if there's things that have been on your mind, because there's a lot of things that we could talk about, just hit us up, and we're happy to share our opinions, and our perspectives, and what I would call, or my kids call, a dad theory, and as you guys have come to know, Jack theories.
Yeah. I think your comment, your opening comment was really interesting, because we had a long discussion with our Q2 planning session for our leadership team at BGW, just talking about that whole thing about, what's changed in the last 2 years. We had to work remote. We were fortunate that we could, but man, it's really tough to maintain a healthy culture and that mentee relationship when you're bringing in, interns and stuff like that. And I was talking with a client this week about it. And they have a lot of people out in the field. They have kind of this in the office, in the field kind of situation. And he basically threw up his hands and said, you can't keep a culture 100% remote unless it was built that way from the very beginning. And that seems to be kind of where we weigh in on it too. I mean, we're still trying to figure it out, quite frankly. Adam, you got some rants or additional thoughts that you want to jump on?
Not a ton. I think that
He's holding back. He's choosing his words carefully. So here it comes.
I know. I'm like, what could give me this part or lose a client with what I'm about to say? No, I mean, I have had some people that have asked the question, hey, tax law change, the economy going to shit. Should I sell out? Should I get rid of everything? Or, whatever the case may be. And I think, what I've seen is that letting tax policy dictate your business strategy is just silly. So like I couldn't ever relate to the people that said, well, I don't want to grow anymore. I want to stay right below 50 employees because I don't want to have to provide health insurance and be subject to the ACA. I'm like, so wait a minute. If your sales per employer are $300,000, that's roughly the cost of providing health insurance, pretty decent plan for 50 some odd employees. You add 2 employees, you're already in the money. It's like, but you're not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't want to grow anymore because I'll be in the next marginal. So I think for the, if you're listening to this, it's just, it's sort of like, if you go back to Jurassic Park, and Jeff Goldblum's character, when he says, life will always find a way, I just feel like, good business owners and entrepreneurs are going to make it, figure out a way to make money and thrive under a Republican administration, a Democratic administration, when there's a recession, when there's not a recession, when there's global conflict, there's not global conflict. I mean, you do need to manage the risk associated with it. But, I think having, a little bit, our observation has been that, the people that kind of stuck with the fundamentals, the basic blocking and tackling, stuck with the routines, they ended up being just fine, because they just, they had the muscle memory of what it means to run a good organization, versus going into, I'm on fire panic mode. Oh my God, I got to provide health insurance. I'm only picking on health insurance because that was one of the more recent examples of someone who said, I'm going to artificially limit my growth so that I don't have to do something that the government is imposing upon me. And I've just started hearing more rumblings about that, whether it's sell out, or get into cash or whatever. It's like, maybe if your window was like 2 years and you wanted no risk, that probably is a viable strategy. But beyond that, probably not.
Yeah, I really like your perspective on that, because, and it comes down to mindset and it comes down to your why, right? I mean, why are you in business? What's driving you? What's your end game? Which, hey, guess what? We're going to talk about that today because it's about succession planning. And it's not just about what happens if I kick the bucket or when I do. It has everything to do with how do you maximize the value of your company and how do you maximize your enjoyment factor of running your company and doing the stuff that you love to do versus getting encumbered with all the kudzu of all the stuff that you don't like doing. That's really what this is all about. And it's interesting, without using names, obviously, but I've got a client, a good friend, 4 years ago was offered a little over $3 million for his company, continued to grow, and he didn't want to do it. He'd never had that kind of money ever. And was just offered about 12 million bucks for it. Boy, that was tough, and they've had very good growth. And I went back to him like, well, what's driving you? What's the important thing? And his big thing then and now is like my team, and he actually has succession plan in place. This group, so he turned it down. They came back and they've been throwing almost 20 million at him. I mean, this is mind-blowing stuff. And he goes, man, I said, well, the question is what's really important to you? Is it, is it a pot of cash because you're afraid that, the world's going to blow up and you got cash? I mean, that could happen, or what's important? And he's like, yeah, it's never been about the money. It's never been about the money. And he's healthy, having fun. He's got a great team around him. They're having fun. And we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It could blow up tomorrow and they could go, man, what coulda, shoulda, but it still comes down to your why and what are you doing? And I can tell you this, 4 years ago, he did not have a succession plan. All roads were leading to him and it wasn't fun. So that's where we're gonna go today. Robert, before we jump into the succession planning. So our friend at Survival CFO, Robert Mayetta, says, I hear today's the last day to apply for EIDL increase. This past Monday, one of my clients was offered and approved an increase by more than $1 million. The underwriter was rushing to push it through given the deadline. When it showed up on the EIDL website, my client clicked to accept it. Then 2 days later, he was informed that the offer was withdrawn. Government at its best. Anyone seeing the SBA pumping out money without properly validating? Sounds political. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a call that I was just on for people that will remain nameless. I mean, when I say pumping out money without validating, I mean, they've got real math, that sits behind it that they're supposed to be using to vet these things. But we've seen some pretty massive approvals that correspond very similar to what Robert just said. So if you've not applied for an increase and it's something that you're thinking about doing, then I would do that.
Yeah, and I would say that I've seen, and there's been talk of this, is that reallocation of money and taking it from one pool that as things kind of wind down, it's like, let's move the money over here. And that it corresponds with, potential increases for the restaurant revitalization fund or whatever they're going to call the next permutation of that. And so, yes, there's been, in order to fund other initiatives that are part of what is in front of Congress at this point, or may become in front of them down the road as far as their budget and intended spending, they are always looking to pull from other places where there seems to be some stuff left in that bucket. So maybe that this individual got caught up in that whirlwind where they had already started siphoning off money and got to a point where they had a stop point that was then passed after they said, yeah, you can have the money. So maybe that's why it got withdrawn. But it doesn't surprise me that, when you get towards the end of a program that, it maybe stops earlier than intended. And so, and we've seen that with other pots of money that have been offered by the federal government, state government, local governments as well. So.
All right, so we're going to go back to succession planning because I know that was a pretty hot topic last week. And so I'm going to launch this poll just to see where the audience is, knowing that some of you guys answered this poll last week when we were contemplating doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. Here's the question. What best describes your particular situation? This will help us to kind of guide the direction. So if you would, please vote. First one is I'm going to let somebody else sort through the rubble once I'm gone, basically the head in the sand, and I'm not going to worry about it. The second one is, hey, I've got a succession plan and it's brilliant. It's in my head. Nobody else knows about it. Or I think they should know it, because people read my mind really well. The third one is I know I need to do it, but either I don't know what to do, so I haven't done much with it, or I'm in the process of actively doing my plan with advisors, great, or I've got it completed. And not only do I have it completed, but key members of my leadership team know the plan. So let's give it just a little bit more. If you guys would, we got about 50% participation. We're up to 57%. Let's see how close we can get to 100. Come on, y'all. Let's see where we're at. All right, 64%. Let's see if we can get to 75%. I wish I could do my Kansas auctioneering skills, but I could never. I could never talk about this.
Let me hear one more. Hey, whatever it is. Like, I don't actually know what they're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's about as close as we could get on the bench, riding the bench at a baseball game. Okay, cool. 71%, not bad. All right, so this is pretty good. I'm shocked, and either somebody's really good or somebody's lying about having 20% of us that have answered have it completed and the key leaders know the plan. Well, if that is a true fact, congratulations, that's a big deal. And I hope that whoever answered that has been able to say, yeah, life is a whole lot more fun, because it usually is. And good on you, those that are in process of actively doing it, and those that need to know that you need to do it. All right, this is a guilt-free place. We're not going to heap shame and guilt upon you, but what we're going to try to do is give you some active things that you can do, one bite at of the elephant at a time, because it is overwhelming. And you can't do it overnight. It's just like, I met with somebody this morning and she said, yeah, I decided I was going to sod my yard. And I figured I could do it in about 3 hours by herself. I'm thinking, what? It took her 3 days. So anyway, no, I mean, this takes time, but one bite at a time. So I'm going to share the results so you guys can see it, just like what we just talked about. I'm going to stop sharing. So knowing what we have there, where we've got a mix, we've got 30% of the people saying, I know I need to do something. About 50% of the people saying, I'm actively doing something about it. And 20% of people saying, hey, I got it done. And my team actually knows what to do and where we're going. So jump ball, I'm going to throw it up to Adam and Jack as to, let's talk about those that know they need to do it, don't know where to start. Let's start there.
Who wants to go first? I guess I'll go first. It's a matter of organization, and I think that it comes from, and everything else stems from there. You have to know where you're at, and you don't necessarily know where you're going to go, but you kind of have to know where you're at. And so, similar to when we were discussing having your ducks in a row in order to be able to apply for federal loan, federal money to get forgiveness, is just start putting stuff together. And whether it is, looking at your financials, having your CPAs look at your financials, I mean, it really just kind of starts there on the number side. I think that the first step for a business owner on the non-financial side is to do some self-evaluation and self-assessment and introspective viewing as to what are you doing for the business? Is it what you want to be doing for the business? And where do you see what is ideal for you as a business owner moving forward? If you could basically wave a magic wand, pixie dust, whatever it may be, and get the business to where you want it to look like, to feel like, to run like, etc. And and again, I think people get bogged down and emotionally, psychologically shut down and say, yeah, I'm just going to deal with that later. Is that you start the how do I get there creeps into the thought process. So you don't start with how you're going to get there. You want to know what it looks like in your mind, and then start with what it actually is at this point. And on the psychological side, it is, okay, I'm really not happy with what I'm doing. I was happy when I was in sales, but now I've had to pick up more of the administrative stuff. I have to deal with personnel issues. I have to deal with all these things. And I would say 9 times out of 10, that if you peel back the layers from that, you will see inefficiencies that you should be out there selling. And it's more efficient to pay someone to be doing your books, or to be an HR person, those kind of things. But again, that's where you start creeping into the, how do I get to, maybe I need to put an HR person. Maybe I need to make these changes. It is more of a self-assessment on numbers. And I think on the non-number stuff as a starting point. And then I would say work on it, put it away, sleep on it, come back to it, share it with your trusted person, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a trusted employee, whether it is an adult child who is has some business knowledge in a young and inexperienced way, but knows you personally and knows your personality and knows your quirks. Because I think that we are our own worst enemy when it comes to self-assessments. And we have many blind spots that we don't see, that others will see, but they're reluctant to tell us because they don't want to hurt our feelings. So I think for me personally, that's the starting point moving forward, and be guarded and not let the how, but the what is right in front of you, and with blinders on, don't look down the road. Don't even look a little bit down the road. Don't think about, how do I modify things? You're not at that point in the analysis. You're thinking about what is the present status quo now, and what you would like it to be down the road. So your front end, back end, don't deal with anything in the middle at this point.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo Jack's comments that, it in slightly harsher language. I mean, there's, two ways to go about it. One way would be, all right, if I died tomorrow, who would do what? Like, how quickly would this place fall apart? The answer would be like 24 hours. You got a real problem. If it's like, probably could survive for about a year, you're actually probably in pretty good shape. But to Jack's point about the methodical approach, I mean, there's documentations and plans. I need to have, do I have the employees by me? Like, that is all extremely important stuff. And at the same time, I would 1000% agree with Jack's comments. It really comes down to, how do I get myself as the CEO out of roles that I'm currently doing that are not CEO roles? It really starts with that simple. And I mean, Jack kind of nailed the order. Like, the most commodity-like item is the finance and HR function. So, meaning like you don't really need to have a ton of specialized industry knowledge or, deep relationship skills with customers, industry, a Rolodex as big as, whatever. You could, if you're struggling in that department, you put out a search, you can find a pretty darn good candidate for a reasonable price in 2 weeks to a month, period. So it's like, if you are still in the middle of having to provide a ton of guidance, or worse yet, doing the finances, that would be kind of the first weak link spot that I could start on. If on the other hand, you're like, look, my finance function, it's like, I don't, they got it. So, okay, that's fine. The next area to focus on them would be the operations. Could the operations run, without me? I mean, I think, my favorite example is a janitorial company that's a client. It's like, are the toilets going to get cleaned in Hearst Tower without you? The answer to that is, yes, you probably have pretty good operations. If the answer to that is no, I have to be riding somebody's butt to make sure that the toilets got cleaned last night, the answer to that is you do not have good operations. That's kind of the second. And then the last is obviously kind of sales and big, big customer relationship building stuff. But, what's funny is that invariably, for whatever reason, a lot of our clients will end up taking the opposite approach. I'm going to try to hire somebody that can really help me out on the sales and marketing side because I want to grow. And it's like, how likely it is that will be a failure from a hire standpoint, versus an expensive versus you free up some of your time to be that salesperson for a little bit longer. If you just hired a competent CFO. So, I really, would wholeheartedly agree with what Jack said. That just work your goal is to work yourself out of a job. And the job you're ultimately stuck left with is kind of strategy, vision type stuff that you really enjoy. And probably the last job you're going to have is sales and big customer relationships.
And I would add that it's easy to talk about, but and this was a struggle for me early on in my career, and somewhat is sort of a struggle, including what happened last night, which is delegation. It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of me just wanting to make sure that everything happens the way it's supposed to happen, even though I know I have people around me that are very competent and can get it done. And so, it was me trying to get too much done and potentially not being as timely. You can get caught up being not as timely as you want to be. And, so then coming to the realization that, okay, yeah, you need to let it go. So for example, last night I was out at a high school fine arts gathering, band concert, etc. And there is no cell signal where I was at. And we were in the middle of doing a deal. And there were a few little pieces that were left to be finalized, which I thought were finalized, but were not. And so I basically told my colleague, a younger partner of mine, I said, okay, here's what I would like to happen. And let's get it done and send it out via DocuSign if it happens. Well, there were some complications by opposing counsel. And, it was like, okay, well, it was delegation by force, because there was no way I could participate. I didn't know what was going on. And the client was insistent on it getting done. And so he had to make certain decisions. And so everything was fine. But, in that moment, I came to the realization that if I was available, I would still be micromanaging the situation, when really it should have been my junior partner that was doing it. But I'm like, okay, I want to get this done for the client. I'm just going to take it. I'm going to run with it. And we are going to sign that thing, And so, but it's just kind of interesting that we're talking about this today, because it happened within, 24 hours that it was, a forced delegation, but I have a propensity to not do that. business owners are the same way. Officers of a company, whether it's not your own company, but you're running a company or you're a CFO, et cetera. It's okay. I want to make sure it gets done. Part of it is so it doesn't get screwed up, but also because you feel like you have a responsibility to make sure that it doesn't get messed up. So why take the chance? But at the same nanosecond, it's going to be fine because the person who is handling it is 110% capable of handling it in your stead. So again, interesting psychology, and it's, there's no shame in it. It happens all the time, but it's something that you, and like talk about blind spots. It's like, oh, well, why are you doing that? Well, okay. The realization, I should be delegating it, and so it just, be aware that that is a typical blind spot for yourself, possibly.
One of the things that I think is interesting that seems to be common, especially around founders that started something from scratch, got it off the ground, you go from all roads lead to you, then you keep growing, and then you still have too many roads leading to you. And Adam kind of nailed it as to, well, both of you did. What do you want to do? And what happens if something, happened to you? And I'm not saying that you just got hit by a bus, but you had to fly, across the world to deal with a family member or whatever, and you're out unexpectedly. How do things keep going? That's one thing. Do you have things in place? And the second thing is if you think about it, instead of, well, my succession, like, am I going to sell? I don't know. Am I going to transition it to a family member? Am I going to transition it to a key employee? We're going to look for a merger of equals, if there is such a thing. I don't believe there is, but you don't even necessarily have to go there. Start with something like, am I doing the stuff that I love to do? And if you love having all roads lead to you, just realize that when somebody, if you want to sell at some point, or Johnny, your apprentice that you're raising up wants to buy it, you're going to take a massive haircut on the value of that company when too many roads lead to you. And I think it does come down to, communication is an important thing, but introspection on what is important to me and what do I love to do. And don't hamstring yourself by saying, well, this is what a CEO does. I've talked about this before, but Casey Crawford's running a huge company. Well, one of the things he loves doing is he likes picking out the merch, and they have pretty cool merch, Well, most CEOs don't do that. And he's got an entire marketing department, but that's what he likes to do. Let him do it. He's not, messing with all the dials on other things, and he's still doing strategic things, but you got to give yourself stuff that you like, that's freeing and playtime for you, that you enjoy. Otherwise, why kill yourself to do this? There should be parts that you enjoy. Adam, I'm curious. I know that you have taken a ton of clients through this. I'd be curious if you can think about, I'll give you kind of a two ways to go. One would be, what's one of the coolest success stories that you can think of somebody that was like, man, I don't know what to do. And you've hit them up with what happens if something, bus hits you, who's going to open up the doors tomorrow, that kind of stuff. Think about a success story there, or another situation where, well, let's go that way rather than complicate it. I like that success story because I'm sure you've got something that's in mind.
Yeah, I mean, you were actually just out there the other day. One of my favorite success stories around a guy who really didn't have to do anything because he's younger than me, is Brian McManus at Hoopog Rating.
Yeah.
I think he started, really focusing on this as a thing based on some conversations that we'd had about, I asked him just a flat out question, how many people report to you, Brian? And he's like, everybody. And if you don't know what Hoopla Grading does, they do, that's it. They do grading, curb and gutter and stuff like that, primarily for big, residential tracks. So like, at a pretty substantial company with, 150 some odd employees at the time, a bunch of heavy equipment, Brian literally was still keeping the maintenance schedule.
Wow.
Like that's how, that's how in the weeds he was. And that was, I think he probably started work on this problem actively in 2017. It's now 2022 or 2022. I mean, you were out there, Gary. How would you describe him?
Oh my goodness. I wish I could show you, because I've got photos on I was blown away. And you got to remember, I was a branding guy early in my career. And so I was blown away. They've got a 40,000 square foot facility, including an amazing podcasting studio. I was extremely jealous of that. But everything was done so intentionally. They also have one of the most amazing workout facilities I've seen. and the sled, it has 2 bulldozers on the side of it. It's just awesome. And they have 3 Caterpillar simulators where their training facilities are amazing. But the guy that Brian brought in from Martin Marietta is a guy named Brandon Lindsay, who had no experience in that business, even though he was in aggregates and stuff like that. And they're both very visionary people. But Brian went to Brandon and said, I need the stuff that you're good at. I would love to have you come in. And basically he's his right-hand guy. He's functioning as COO, but he has all these complementary things that, and Brandon said, yeah, I can't go to a job site and see it like he does. Like Brian can see everything that's wrong, everything that needs to be moving. He can visualize it. He knows that business extremely well. Brandon knows how to build teams, how to train, how to take certain things off of Brian's plate that he didn't like to do, but had to do. And it's just really an amazing thing. I've never seen any other company, and I've been in lots of M&As, where they can acquire a company and the cultural integration is non-existent. It like problems are non-existent. Most cultural integrations are dumpster fires.
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of that has to do with Brandon, but it has to do with Brian's self-awareness and probably an impetus like Adam going, hey, wait a minute, how many people, because they've got well over, I think, 300 or 400 people now.
It's north of 400. I mean, that's my point. I mean, they're double, they're double the size, in a very manageable, controllable way, whereas that would not have been something they could have done back in 2017.
Yeah, it's one of the healthiest cultures I've seen in any company. And I mean, wow, and so how long ago was that the conversation went to now?
About 2017 is when he really,
wow.
When I think 2000, if I go back and look at it, I would say it was probably 2017 or 2018. I gave him a copy of Traction, and he listened. He got the audio book, listened to it 4 or 5 times, and he said, "All right, I'm ready to get going."
And they are cooking with gas, man. They just did a leadership thing with Jocko, and in one of the training rooms, they had this big bell like you would see at Bud's for Navy SEALs training. And I go, is that the bell that I'm thinking that it is? Like if somebody is like wanting to punch out? And he goes, yep, that's exactly what that is. It's not the let's ring the bell because we got a sale. You ring the bell in Bud's training, it's because you washed out and you can't take it. I mean, like, they're so intentional about this, but again, it didn't happen overnight. Incremental steps, but wow, what a cool thing. That's a great story. So you mentioned traction. Tell the audience what that is, Adam, because not everybody may know what traction in EOS is and what that did.
Yeah, I think, that it's a book that is just provides a framework for how you ought to run a small to mid-sized business. I mean, I bullet down to that. So it's kind of easier to just characterize what it was like at BGW before we implemented it versus what it's like now. Before we read the book and implemented it, because we just got through tax season, we go through tax season and say, this is just, horrible. Let's get together afterwards, have a good bonding experience, come up with, well, what can we do differently next time? And, come up with some good ideas for process improvement, strategy, all that kind of stuff. And, we do that, have our group hug. We actually had it at the Whitewater Center. Identify, parcel out, here are the people that are going to work on stuff, fixing everything, everybody get to work. Well, how are we going to check in? We should have some meetings just to check on people. No, we can't have meetings. I mean, people are adults, they have work to do. We'll reconvene after 6 months and see how we're doing. Well, how often should we meet as a leadership team? I don't know. I mean, I guess we get together for once a week. What's the agenda? Well, whatever we need to talk about. These meetings are a waste of my time. Why am I here? They're agendaless. We're making up the agenda in the meeting. Oh, okay. Well, maybe we'll just stop having them all. We'll have a meeting if we have an emergency or crisis we need to deal with. So revenues at BGW were like that. It was chaos, just absolute chaos. Nobody could make any decisions. We weren't making any progress. We implemented the system, which is basically prescribes a way to set your strategy, set goals around, making that strategy happen. And then, ultimately it boils down to having a weekly meeting to make sure that you're on track with it. For a different purpose, I was writing down some results for a meeting that we're having tomorrow. And, our story is actually very similar to Hoopah's, that we have over doubled in size since implementing the system in 2015. So it's 1.5 times, 2.5 times the size we were when we implemented the system in 2015. So that just, that I give 100% credit to the ability to having a framework for making decisions and making stuff happen. Even if it feels like sometimes it's slow, it's very methodical, it's very methodical progress. But again, it's just a way to run a company.
And see, that goes to what we've been talking about with like introspection. I mean, you took the time, you made the effort, so invested in yourself in a non-billable fashion to be able to, to improve. And so we're talking about blind spots. I think that, it would have been very easy for you to have said, well, this is what I think should happen. I mean, you went with outside materials, third-party materials. I'm sure you probably talked to advisors, and it was a collective effort. It's kind of like, I say that in my shop, if you take an issue and ask the attorneys, ask the staff, ask our office manager for their perspective, you're likely going to get different perspectives. You may end up at the same place, but it's kind of like there was a show on NBC. It was a police show, and it was there'd be a scene like a shooting or something, and then you'd get like the initial angle, but then they would rewind the tape essentially, and then after the first commercial, go at it from a different angle, and you would see things that you should have seen, but you didn't see because you were at a different angle on the other side of the street, etc. So viewing your business from different angles, and those angles meaning the people that are in your shop, is a very worthwhile experience. And I know that a lot of owners and the C-suites just don't take the time to do that, for various reasons. It could be that they just don't feel like there's enough time. It could be that they just don't value the opinions of others and feel like that they know best. It could be that they are afraid of asking the questions because maybe it makes him or her look less confident, weaker, maybe as a leader, having to ask, hey, what are the problems? And, I'm here to fix them, kind of thing, rather than saying, I see the problems, I'm going to fix them, which I think is very arrogant to do. But again, it happens all the time. So going back to that introspective, you have assets in the form of people that it's kind of like, going into a new house that you've purchased. They say, get without furniture that's in there. When you're putting together your punch list, lay down on the ground and look up and see what you see. Go sit on the toilet, make sure it's closed first, and look around and see what you see. And so that's what you need to do with your business, which is to look around, ask questions, be open. The more open that you are, and the more that you tell your people that it's a safe place to chat, and more importantly, that you fulfill that promise, that there's no retaliation, retribution in any form or fashion, then you'll be successful in that process. A way of doing that is, and I don't know if we still have it or not, I think we do, a suggestion box, and having, as part of that process, people throwing in suggestions. Now, I don't think we ever implemented the insomnia cookies on Friday afternoon for people, but there were some pretty good ideas that came about from the suggestion box that we did implement over the course of time. So another way of keeping it anonymous, but visually keeping it anonymous, versus sending an email or other ways of oh, I recognize that writing, so whatever it may be.
Yeah. So this is going to feel less like succession planning, but it dovetails right into what Adam and Jack were both talking about. And we do this, we've done this in our entire company. And I do it with every management team that I work with from a coaching standpoint, especially if they're in high growth. And it's super, super simple. We probably talked about it before, but I'm going to talk about it again because it starts with you as the owner. And if you're not an owner and you're not, and you're listening to this, still do it for yourself, because it has direct impact as to your productivity and your satisfaction in your job and where you're at. We call it Thrive Wither. And it's a simple T-chart. Just split the page vertically with a line, then do a horizontal line at the top, write Thrive on the left side, write Wither on the right side. And it's not strengths and weaknesses. There can be strengths and weaknesses, but it has everything to do what makes you come alive in the Thrive side. Stream of consciousness, start with that. And this is super, super simple. I had to do it when I had to leave my own company when I was 32 years old. So that was a long time ago, 38 years ago, almost. But, and then I wrote the Wither, the stuff that you don't like, the kind of environments, if you need more variety, or you hate variety and you just want repetition, then write, but whatever makes you wither, the stuff that you don't like to do. And here's what's interesting about it. A lot of times as you're growing, hey, there's nobody else to do this, so I'll do it. And you actually become proficient at it, but it drains your tank. I know I've got two good friends that were accounting majors and that went into accounting. One is a world-class illustrator. He hated accounting. He was very good at it, but he hated it. Another one is our coach, Robert. And just because you're good at it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's draining your tank, put it in there. But If you can identify those things, kind of like what Brian McManus did, thanks to Adam helping coach him, start looking and identifying the stuff that's making you wither. And then start looking at your team and say, who would actually thrive? Because it may be inconceivable to your mind. Well, why would anybody like doing these things? Well, guess what? There are people wired different than you that actually like some of that stuff. Then you start doing that. And I call it horse trading of responsibilities. You're still the CFO, you're still the CEO, you're still the COO, but start horse trading some of those responsibilities that someone may come alive in that is draining your tank. That's just a really simple thing, but I would put that on the front end of this process as you're being introspective, because it comes down to, like my friend that has turned down now almost 20 million bucks for his company, that he turned down 3.5 million 4 years ago. Well, what's important? What makes you come alive? One of the things for him is his team. He knows that if he sells, the band gets broken up, and that's part of his family. That's his thing. So anyway, I hope that helps you think a little bit differently than just, oh, succession plan, I got to know who it is and I got to have key man insurance. Yeah, all of those things come down the, further down the pike, but start with what makes you come alive and what you really want. You get to design it. That's the cool part.
I go off on a little bit of a tangent to something that came up recently, which is S corporations. We kind of discussed this previously, but it has reared its head again, which is that maybe years ago, it was the thing to do, which is set up an S corp, new business or kind of growing business. It's an S corp, easy to manage. It's simple math. At the end of the day, the net profits are distributed according to the ownership percentages of the owners. And, it's just simple to run. And you may have the benefit of putting some money over as salary, as payroll, and pay the payroll tax, but then maybe push more over into the distributions, capital gains category and pay lower tax. And so by default, I see how companies as they grow have just said, same as before. We can even file our own stuff. We know how to do the S corp election with the IRS. We can get our EIN, et cetera. And there's really not a whole lot of thought process put into that. That can create a problem down the road under certain circumstances where a lot of times private equity or venture capital would prefer that you not be an S corporation. And there's a number of reasons for that, which is, as far as having the ownership stacked and, having an issue of an S corp being there and trying to, the restrictions on ownership of S corps. It could be that, so a lot of those private equity and venture capital prefer partnerships. There's also the issue of potential qualified sale, which is a very narrow pathway for a potential tax-free or tax-deferred sale. Now I'm getting into your world, but only because I heard this directly from someone in the know about this stuff. And so don't default to that as you grow or open up a division, or if you have another location and you want to do some asset protection. So, there should be some thought process of doing that. And I think that's also part of your exit plan, should be an analysis of what you have in place, because there may be ways to further be more efficient now and kind of deal with, take the wounds now rather than later, possibly. So, and I know we're getting into kind of how do you make things happen, because we kind of sort of have gone into that rather than on the front end of, what you need to be thinking about. But it just, for whatever reason, it's come up 3 to 4 times in the past 2 weeks that oh, I'm looking at essentially a map, like a PowerPoint slide that this is the org chart. It's like S Corp, S Corp, S Corp. And in one instance, there were 4 new entities being formed, and I was informed that the S Corp election potentially is in process. And I said, immediately call your CPA and tell them to hold off on doing that until we have a further discussion as to the reasons for these new companies and what they're going to be doing. And if there's no one earning any wages in that company and it's a holding company, you may not want to be an S corporation because you don't really need to be. I have people in my shop here that think that S corporations are one of the worst things that's ever happened to US tax code. I'm not that far on line with that, but there are certain reasons why. And I think that it's just very, I don't want to say it's academic laziness. I think it's just, hey, it worked before, it'll work again. Why not? So just be aware of that. So that was my little tangent on planning.
Good stuff. So our audience, besides the polling, has been pretty quiet, but we did get a good question from Robert and point. So thank you for that, Robert. Anybody else out there has a burning question before we wrap it up? We will put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel later on today, as we have the other 107 weeks. So, and next week is going to be really fun. I've got a special t-shirt, and that's all I'm going to say. I got a special t-shirt for next week. So, all right. Last call. Last thoughts from you, Adam or Jack, something that you want to accentuate?
No, never too soon to start thinking.
I would say if you are still looking for money, that there continues to be like local dollars that are out there that and I do work with Centralina, which is a quasi governmental entity that helps run different funds as far as the administering of who gets things kind of. And so I see things still being processed by them. So every once in a while, just take a look and see what's might be out there in this community and other community, maybe industry specific as well. So don't give up. It's worth Googling that in between, sliding around on Facebook and Instagram and other things.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate it. If you know of anybody else that is wondering about stuff, or they're afraid to call their CPA, and if they're a client of ours and they're afraid to call us, then we need to deal with that right now. But you can get some great advice, great questions that we've been able to answer legally as well as from a CPA perspective. So this is a good opportunity. So we'll plan on being back at the same time, same place, same bat channel next week, 11 o'clock. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.